Here we have a 2005 Skoda Fabia. It's fitted with the 1.2 3-cylinder petrol engine and it's got roughly 78,000 miles on the clock. This Skoda's come in today for its annual inspection service, and as part of the service I'm going to be carrying out a brake fluid change. It's recommended on average every 3 years to flush and change the fluid because it can absorb moisture and get quite mucky. So the reservoir on this vehicle is down here, and to start off with I'll take the cap off and see how much fluid I can extract from the reservoir. Right, so let's see if we can get some fluid out of this reservoir. As you can see on the cap, it should tell you, oh there it says, only .4 brake fluid, which is the most common fluid you'll find. Now what I want to try and do is empty as much of this fluid out of the reservoir as I can before bleeding the brakes. It just seems a bit pointless, if you like, to pump all the dirty fluid around the system when you can sometimes get quite a bit out before you start. It's just got like a gauze filter there. It looks like it's been out before. Oh, not very easily though. So it just needed a bit of twisting and pulling at the same time, and eventually that came out. Now I've got this tool that I use for siphoning. You can use turkey baste or anything you've got really laying around. I just think it helps to speed the process up a little bit if you can empty this out. And so there's quite a bit of fluid came out there. Let's see if I can get any more out. There's a fair amount. Bear in mind, if you spill any, like I have, it makes a brilliant paint stripper. So don't get it on your paintwork. And if you do, just get some fresh water and wash it off. I think I've only got it under the bonnet. I'll put the cap back on first. Don't want any water getting in there. That's all you've got to do. You can get a soft bit of cloth and give it a wipe down, but that's generally fine, just to rinse it off. Right, so now that's empty, I'll get some fluid and we'll top that up and then fit the brake bleeder. Right, I've got a litre of brake fluid here. This is just a container I use to pour out of the 5 litre container I've got. 5 litres of it you should be able to get for around about £30. I generally buy the bigger containers because I do this quite regularly. And it's a good idea to make sure you've got a new container of brake fluid and don't use something that's been sat around on the shelf for years, because as I said earlier, it does absorb moisture. Okay, so I'll grab my brake pressure bleeder and we'll fit that on next. Now, as most of you probably know, there are a number of different ways, different tools you can use to bleed brakes. You don't actually need any tools, you just need an empty bottle to bleed into, and you can have somebody sit in the car and pump the brake pedal up and down. I'm not a massive fan of doing that, particularly on cars as they get older, because you're pushing the seals to extremes that they don't usually travel to in the master cylinder. And I have had the odd instance where it's caused the seal to split in the master cylinder, and then you never end up getting a good brake pedal, end up having to replace the master cylinder. Up until now I've been using a small vacuum device that you can plug onto each bleed nipple and suck the fluid through, but I've recently just bought a pressure bleeder, which now I wish I'd bought years ago. It does, you can get all different size caps, but the one it comes with seems to fit most systems, which is handy. So I don't think the caps are that cheap to buy separately. Right, that's on. So I went for a good name brand because I do use it a lot. The Sealy one. You can get something very similar quite cheaply. This one, I mean, it wasn't the end of the world, it was just under £60, so I'm happy with that. Holds 2.5 litres of fluid, so I generally allow around about 1 litre of fluid for a brake fluid change. But bear in mind, we've already done probably the best part of half a litre of fluid straight from the reservoir. So I'm just going to pump this up now to pressurise it. The good thing with this is it can just sit under the bonnet, pressurised, keeping the reservoir topped up. So I can just concentrate on each of the bleed nipples, rather than worrying about making sure the reservoir's topped up all the time, which is what you'd have to do if you were manually bleeding the brakes with somebody sitting inside pumping the pedal. Right, I'm going to leave it about there. That's a good pressure. So before I start, jack the car up or take it up on the lift, I want to make sure the wheel nuts are loose. This has got steel wheels, so plastic hubcap trim. No locking wheel nuts on this one. The ones with alloy wheels are the ones that you generally find have a locking wheel nuts, and you want to make sure you know where the key is for that before you start as well. That's it, they're all loose. Make sure you're ready to catch the wheel. Sometimes they can just fall off, other times they can be stuck on there, corroded. That one's quite loose. Off it comes. Right, we're on the passenger side rear, near side rear, which is, if you're changing fluid, they always recommend that you start with the brake furthest away from the master cylinder, the reservoir, which happens to be the near side rear. If you're changing fluid, I don't think it's that important. If you're starting with an empty system, then it's important, but it makes no odds really, so I might as well start with the one furthest away. So we've got a bleed nipple here. It's got a rubber dust cover on it, which you can pull off. and I believe it's 7mm. Yeah, so I just want to make sure I can loosen that. Yeah, which I can, that's good. I've got my bleed bottle here, which is just an old 1 litre brake fluid container. Just made a rough hole in the top. You don't want the hole tight around the pipe because you need to allow the air to come out of the bottle as it fills up. Bit of an old coat hanger or wire of some sort on there. It's just handy to be able to hook it somewhere. We'll loosen that off and you can see the fluid coming out. So I'll leave that now for a few minutes to do its thing, and then we'll lock it off and move to the next one. Right, I'm going to lock it off there. When the fluid's old, you can definitely see a colour change. If you've got a clear piece of pipe, you can see this is, you know, that is the colour of new brake fluid now. It was a little bit duller when it first started coming out. You can also see on the bottle I've got quite a bit of fluid out of this one. So I'll nip that off there, pop that pipe off, get that spanner off, that would help, and put the dust cap back on. We won't record it, but I'm going to go to the other side on the back now, exactly the same procedure, and bleed that one through. As you can see, we've moved to the front now. I've done both the rear brakes. You don't necessarily need to take the wheels off. It's just easier for us to record it with the wheels off. So same again, you've got a bleed nipple at the top here with a rubber dust cover on it. The front ones, whereas the back ones are 7mm, these are 11. Let's get the hose on there and give that a, there it goes. And that's it. Again, we'll leave that for a couple of minutes to bleed through. Right, that's been bleeding now for a few minutes. And we're up here now with the fluid near the top of that bit of tape. Oh, I think my homemade bleed bottle needs a bit of modifying. Right, so I'll lock that off. Put the dust cover back on. And same again, I'm going to go and do the other front brake, which we won't record because, again, it's identical to doing this side. Right, now the job's done, we can get the wheel back on. Do these up with a gun, but I will put it on the floor and double check the tightness by hand. Right, we'll drop the ramp down next. I just always like to check things by hand afterwards. And it's pretty clear that the impact gun does things up tight. And as with every fixing on a car, you will find a tightening torque specification for all the nuts and bolts. I just like to check these by hand. Just got to be sensible about it, really. I'd imagine there to be about 110, 120 Newton meters if you've got a torque wrench to hand. Right, get this wheel trim back on, remembering to line up the dust cap with a little cutout in the trim. As you can see, the fluid levels drop right down. Still got a drop in there. The pressure's gone down where we've been bleeding, so we'll let the rest of that pressure out. Get the pipe off. I do tend to lose a bit of brake fluid down here when this comes off. Remove that cap. And we've got the filter to go back in, or the strainer, like a gauze strainer. Now I wouldn't be surprised if this sploshes up everywhere. Oh no, that's gone in quite easily. Lovely. Just want to make sure the fluid level's okay. Which it is. There's a little arrow on the side of the bottle. It's a little bit difficult to see, but the fluid's up to that. Then we'll get this cap back on. And as I've spilt some fluid, a few drops all around there, I'll just give that a little rinse off. If you're sensible, you might want to do this bit outside and not make a mess on your workshop floor. That's it. Before you move the car, obviously make sure you've got a good brake pedal. And as with all my jobs, I like to give it a road test and make sure the brakes perform as they should do. I'll probably get it back in the workshop afterwards and just quickly have a glance around the bleed nipples and make sure there's no leaks.